In this video, I want to look at creating contact sheets for a collection of video files. And there are a couple of different ways we can do this. I typically prefer to use Photoshop, but we're going to look at using Adobe Bridge as well. And in fact, I'm going to use Adobe Bridge to modify some files to make them better and easier to use and manipulate using the contact sheet automation tool built into Photoshop. And as a reminder, that can be found under in Photoshop under File, Automate. It's a batch process, but it's a kind of a specific batch process. So it's the contact sheet. It's a built-in routine. And we're also going to do some batch processing as well to create still images out of video files. So to have a look at that, let's just open up a video file with Photoshop. So if I open, let's find a video file. We'll try that one. I'm not sure what that looks like. Let's see what that looks like. So when you open up a video file in Photoshop, it parks the timeline. First of all, it brings up this little timeline window, which you normally wouldn't see for a still image, obviously. But then it parks the cursor at or the timeline indicator at frame 0, which in most of our studio work is a black frame. So let's go ahead a little bit, and we can see any individual still from within that file. So what we're going to do is to open up a video file and grab a still frame from it, and then save that still frame out as part of a collection to make contact sheets with in Photoshop. Now, if we just wanted to create a fairly simple contact sheet without any design elements in it or much control over how the layout works, we could just do that in Adobe Bridge as well. And in Adobe Bridge, in the Output tab, it lists several basic contact sheets that you can create, and it will just make a number of pages based on however many images you drop in to fill it up. So let's go to, how about 5 columns by 8 rows, and I'll just select, I don't know, let me here, if I go here, let's do this. So I'm going to select this many and drag them in here and see what happens. So they're just going to add 17 files. Well, it didn't fill it up. It just fills them in based on whichever setting you have here. It's going to go either fill them in across or up and down first. There's not really much control over that, although it is nice because it will do video files, and Photoshop will not do video files. Photoshop contact sheets only work with still images. So really we have 2 challenges here. A, to make a collection of still images from a series of video files, and then B, or secondly rather, control how they're laid out, either across, chronologically, and also any other information like file names or dimensions, that sort of thing, which you may or may not want. In this case, I did not. So the first thing to do is to use the batch process to create a collection of still images from a number of video files. And to do that, we're doing a batch process by opening all of the files in a selected folder, doing something to them. In this case, we are applying an action which we created, and that action just has a few steps. And then you apply the action and then output the individual still frame as a still image versus video. So let's have a look at the action real quick. In Window, Actions, I've got it up already. You can see them over here, and I've created a custom action that will go open up the video file. It'll set the frame to 45 seconds in. And the reason I do that is a lot of our studio processed files start with a black frame. So if you don't go in 30 or 40 seconds, you're just going to get a black frame on this still. So always in the action, we want to advance, 30 or 40 seconds, something like that. And then just to make things a little bit easier, it's going to standardize the scaling. It's going to scale all the images to be 720 pixels high. And then in our video cases, that works out to a 1080 by 720 or 1280 by 720, 16 by 9 image. And then the image gets saved as a PNG file. So it's a very simple 3-step action that gets applied as part of the automate batch process. So the result, it takes a little bit of time to process all those depending on the speed of your machine, but the result is going to be, let's see here, would just be a collection of stills. Now the other challenge is, so in this particular context sheet, I wanted the sample videos to be based chronologically versus alphabetically. When you're creating a context sheet, you don't have a lot of control over the placement of the images other than whether they go across first or down first, similar to how that's worked in Adobe Bridge. You also pick the size of the finished context sheet in terms of pixels here, and then how, just like in Adobe Bridge, you want the number of columns across and the number of rows down. So what Photoshop will do is just pull in the images alphabetically and fill them in based on the parameters you've put in here. And then you can also put in some spacing, that sort of thing. But if in this particular case, this context sheet was a collection of I think it was 342 videos that had been made in the first quarter of this of this production year, right after the studio was opened up and remodeled. And so there was some interest in having a chronological view. Now that presents some challenges. So what we did, let's go back to Adobe Bridge, is we looked at the video files. Let's see here. So all of these video files are also listed alphabetically. Let me organize them as a list. So they're just alphabetical, but much like you can do in the Finder, where you can pick whether you organize them by name or by date modified or created, or size in this case with Adobe Bridge. Because you can organize them by date, you can then process them by date as well. So let's go to date modify. That one's a little messed up. So this video here would be the first one chronologically in this collection, made in September. And at the end of this list, it should end in sometime in July. And so in Adobe Bridge, one of the things you can do to process your images is to rename them. So you can have a collection of files, and there may be a reason you want to have some standardized naming. In this case, we want to have some standardized naming that's based on the date of the file. And so I'm going to select all here, and in Adobe Bridge, I believe it's under Tools, Batch Rename. And so in this case, what I'm going to do is create a name that is based on the date that it was created. So I'm going to start off with, just to see how it's working, output will be, and it shows you here what the new file name will be. And then I'm going to add, let's just put a dash in here, output 190401. So that is the date that it was created based on, well, this first one's a little bit messed up. Let's go to date modified and see whether that's any better. Yeah, I think some of these have some some problems in where they came from. So the date created is a little bit messed up, but it typically is the same unless it's messed up January 04. They're going to be the same. 8/18/21, 8/18/21. So we're going to just use that. And then additionally, we can add a sequence number just to make as a bit of cross-checking to make sure things are working. So all of these video files are going to go from their original name to this new file name that has the date embedded in it. And then using these renamed video files, we will batch process them in Photoshop using the actions to create a series of still images that will use this new name instead of the old name. And then those are the ones that get processed in the contact sheet. So the end result is you get a contact sheet of files organized by date by tricking the name to be the date. So we'll go ahead and rename these. And it goes pretty quick. So all of these video files now have the new name with the date embedded in them, as well as this extra file sequence number, just again for some cross-checking if we need that. So then this collection of files will then be what we process in Photoshop with the actions. So we will automate a batch. Now this processing of video files can take quite a bit of time depending on how many images you have. I believe this collection has close to 350, 342 if I'm not mistaken. And so it's going to take a little bit of time to process, but when it's done, I've already pre-processed them to avoid the time on this recording. So when it's done, we will end up with a collection of still images that begin with the first one recorded back in July, ending with 342 with sometime in it looks like maybe mid-October, something like that. So now this collection of still images are going to be processed as a contact sheet. Now, if we go back to Photoshop and we remember that when we're creating a contact sheet, we need to determine the number of rows across and the number of columns across and the number of rows down. And so if you only have 10 or 12 or 20 or 15 or something like that, you can obviously do the math in your head. But when you start getting it into several hundred images, it can be a bit of a challenge to figure out what's the best number of columns across by the number of rows down that fits within the size of the finished contact sheet that you want to have. So given that we know we have 342 images, we can do a little bit of math in Excel to figure out how many rows and columns a total 342 will be. And I've done this already. I've figured this out. So what I did was I knew that we needed a total number of images to be 342. And I just put my best guess in here. Obviously, if I start with 10 rows across, 10 rows down, how many rows across? Well, 34.2. That's not going to work out. So what I need to come up with is some whole numbers. And so this calculation comes C42 divided by A2, or C2 divided by A2 equals this. So if I just grab this and run this formula all the way down, it should be the same formula all the way across. So C3 divided by A3 equals that. And again, not going to work. It's not a whole number. None of these are whole numbers until we start getting down into here. And so that tells us that if we had 18 rows, by 19 columns, we would end up with 342 images. Obviously, if you swap those two numbers here, you're also going to get 342 images. So then it's just a matter of determining how you want your finished contact sheet to look. Given that these are 16 by 9 images, we might want them to have more rows than in fewer columns. It might fit on the page a little bit better. So therefore, this number here rather, is we know that in our actions we converted the files to be 720 high by, that's not right. Width should be 1280. Let's run that all the way up there. Let's fix that. Okay, I think that's going to fit now. Hope so. So again, 19 rows by 18 columns will give us 342. And if we stuck with the 720 high by 1280 wide, our finished contact sheet would be that big, which is kind of huge. So this number here is 25% of that. So if we make a contact sheet that is 3420 by 5760, that's this many wide, it should fit pretty good. And in fact, that's exactly how it works out. So let's just look at these numbers here. We've got 19 rows, 18 columns, total of 342, 25% scaling of our finished still images would be a 3420 by 5760 image. And if we go back to Photoshop and we look at the size of this finished image, that's exactly what it is. Just to recap, we were looking to see what a collection of 342 videos looked like over time. So that's the first video that was recorded after the studio remodel, and that is the last one of the quarter. This is the first quarter of the year, and each video was brought in through a Photoshop action, and frame at 45 seconds was grabbed, exported as a still image. Those 342 still images are batch processed through the contact sheet tool in Photoshop and laid out according to some simple math that we did in Excel. I hope you find this helpful. Thank you.